Hey, what's up everyone? So, we're kind of in the middle of this project, but I want to take this out as an opportunity because about 3 weeks ago, well, about 3 weeks from today, I received, not from one person, but about 4 people, about 7 pieces of equipment that were completely ruined because there were 2 cycles and they weren't given the right fuel. So, I'm going to make a 2 parts series. One is what is a 2 cycle, second one is what is 2 cycle fuel. This is going to be the first one, so watch this one and check out the second one. First things first, what we're going to do, I'll outline it out, so I suggest watching the whole thing, but if you only need to know a certain part, then go right ahead. I'm going to explain what a 2 cycle does, what it requires, what's the implications if you doing the wrong type of fuel, and some general tidbits and information and things to look for. So, what is a 2 cycle? Well, what does a 2 cycle do? If you look out there, that pressure washer is what they call a 4 cycle. There's 4 cycles for each combustion event, let's just say that. Now, for single cylinders, it's really easy. Vehicles, same exact thing, except you just have multiple versions of it going throughout different phases throughout each other. So basically, on a 4, you have the intake where you are bringing fuel in and air. Then you have the compression, and at the top of the compression, spark plug ignites, sends that piston back down with the explosion. That's the third one. And finally, which is called the power. And then finally, the fourth one is the pistons can go right back up and another valve opens somewhere else on the top of the motor, and letting all those spent gases or exhaust out of the muffler. 2 cycle doesn't have that. It has no valves. So how does it work? Well, here we go. We need to know a couple things first. Carburetor, exhaust, cylinder, pistons inside, and well, spark plug is right there. Usually it's right there. So if you were going to take this apart, you would see that it has a normal piston that goes up and down just like the pressure washer. However, unlike the pressure washer, it doesn't have the luxury of having fuel go in through a valve. So what they do is they actually have channels on the side of the cylinder, and in those channels the fuel actually gets pressed in there into the top of the cylinder, and then once the fuel is in there, it gets compressed and then burned and then goes out the exhaust. So that's the general purpose. So basically fuel, the pistons down here, fuel is going to be getting compressed at the same time. Fuel at this point is going to be, because this area, consider a 2 cycle, the top and the bottom, it works on pressures. So as the pressure rises up here and this is starting to expand up, it becomes a low pressure point. That's going to cause the air to suck in through the intake, take a little bit of fuel with it.
I can't connect to the Wi-Fi now.
Take the fuel with it, and then it will kind of sit there. The combustion event occurs. That piston's now going down. Well, at that moment in time, there's a lot of pressure in here, and then when the piston starts going down, there's a port on the side, and the gas, because there's high pressure and low pressure, escapes. You can play with that whole exhaust system to create more pressure. I'm not going to get into that. But as we are traveling back down, the pressure below becomes a lot higher and the pressure up top becomes a lot lower. So that's going to force that air-fuel mixture through those channels and up inside. Now once it starts going to the bottom of its travel, it's just going to want to keep on going back up because it's done at that stroke, and then the whole thing starts over. So it's just a constant flow, high, low, high, low, high, low. Now that part what I was mentioning about the intake, having air, or excuse me, the lower section getting lower pressure and sucking air through the intake and mixing it with fuel. That part's important because when you have a two-cycle like this, oil is in the fuel. So when that charge or the fuel and the air mixture is down in the lower area, that's where the crankshaft is, that's where the connecting rod is, a lot of the, pretty much all of the internals are right there. That fuel mixture and oil mixture is going to kind of coat those internals, and then it's going to allow for good lubrication. It's going to coat the cylinder wall. That's just how lubrication works on this. So now that we know everything that it does, or how it works, what does it require? Well, it's going to require good fuel. That's important too, because unlike most, you know, like on a larger lawnmower, you could put a little aged fuel in there. It would probably run just fine. It's not good for it, but it at least would run. Smaller engines like this, the quality of fuel really becomes a lot more important, so it needs good fuel. And two, it also requires oil. Not just any type of oil, though. It's going to require a special type of two-stroke engine oil, two-cycle engine oil. You know, so you could buy these individually or pre-made with the oil mixed in there. True Fuel is a common name. I don't really like them because you don't know how long they've been there. That's just my opinion. So we know that it needs good fuel and oil. Kind of going off of number 4, but if you can, get this Echo Red Armor. I'm not getting paid or anything by them. I literally just bought this big jug because I use it so often. It's a great oil. So I'm not going to go over how to mix it or or anything like that. That's in part 2. But just know that you do require good fuel and oil along with the normal compression, air, spark, you know, all that stuff. But dissimilar from a 4-cycle, you do need to have a special type of oil. Old machines potentially could have been designed and meant to be used with engine oil, but those are super old, and even then you can still run this in there. What happens if you don't use that oil? Well, in the beginning, nothing. You'll probably have a little bit of normal usage, maybe a couple of seconds, maybe as long as a few minutes, don't know. Depends on your machine and how you're using it. But what's eventually going to happen is all that motion is going to continue on, but gasoline isn't a very good lubricant. It's a great cleaner. It's great for a lot of things, but it's not a good lubricant. So what's going to happen is all the wear points, all the points that are touching each other are going to get hot. They're going to start grinding on each other. The piston rings and specifically are going to start expanding. They're not going to have a good lubrication. They're going to start scraping the the cylinder walls. It can get so hot it starts damaging the piston. That's just the top end. On the lower end, your crank can start to get so hot that it actually starts to damage the connecting rod and how it connects. Usually there's this little like roller pin setup they have on them. Those can start to fail. Eventually you just have a whole lot of pieces of metal that are getting hot and starting to grind on each other and failing, and the next thing you know, you just have a whole lot of bad. And you can, if you spot it early enough, you potentially didn't cause any horrible harm, you can stop, put the right fuel in there. I would lubricate as much as you can through the spark plug hole, and if you can, I would even take off the carburetor and try to oil that lower end. But most of the time, you don't know that you mixed the wrong or added the wrong fuel until you have a problem. Now, this is kind of like a hazy area. On almost all machines, it will tell you the mixture, I'm not going to go over too much the mixture, but just know that having too low of a mixture is bad. Having too high of a mixture is also bad. Having too high of a mixture is not going to be bad immediately, but it's going to be bad over time. Having too low of mixture is going to be a little bit more of an immediate effect. Keep that in mind. So watch the fuel video and we'll go ahead and answer those. So now we know all that. Let's go ahead and continue on. So this is going to be a random little tidbits, and if you made it this far, I'm going to go over, just like I said, a whole lot of random things, but they're specific to 2 cycles that I see. I have a couple machines here, and usually how you can tell a 2 cycle is a 2 cycle, or whatever you want to call it, is there's no oil. Very easy. There's no place to put oil. Pretty self-explanatory because the oil is in the fuel. Now, sometimes you can't always see, I mean, I would hope you can see if you can add oil, but let's say you're taking a quick look at something and you see valves. That is not always the case, especially when it comes down to steel equipment. When you start seeing stuff like this, that is still requiring 2-cycle fuel. It's a 4-stroke machine, but it is requiring 2-stroke fuel. So keep that in mind. So the whole beginning part where I was mentioning that you can tell it doesn't have the luxury of a valve, they've kind of gone away with that in some cases, majority not. But just know certain machines will say stuff like that and you'll see valves. I mean, here's a couple of them. I mean, that one is just normal. This Echo blower is normal. In fact, the owner even had me do a tune-up on it recently, and even, I don't know if you can read that, but even mixed, or wrote on there, mixed fuel only. So that's good. Okay, so that's one tidbit. Not all machines will not have valves if they're 2-cycle. Some 2-cycles will still have valves. They're not a true 2-cycle, but they require the fuel. Okay. Next, 2-cycles suffer from quite a bit of problems, and they have a lot of benefits. Some of the problems is because every time the piston's basically going up, it is going to combust that fuel mixture. You are going to use more fuel than you would assume. Like, you would assume this tank is going to last a while. It really doesn't. Like, if you took, let's say, I think all 4 of those actually are 4 mix, but let's say this one's a 4 mix and that one's not. If you were going to run the 4 mix on the same amount of fuel and that, you probably would get a significantly longer runtime than that one ever would. Excuse me, than that one ever would. So there's that. However, it is a very consistent, especially for single cylinder engines, amount of power. That's why it's kind of nice to have them. In addition to that, look how small this is. You don't have to have a big area filled with oil. You don't have to fill it with oil. Bigger areas require more material, requires oil. They're generally smaller, so they could package it smaller. If you've ever seen some of those, I'm going to go back to the Weed Eater again. The Weed Eaters that do take oil, they are legit 4-cycle engines, pretty much just a smaller version of that pressure washer type motor. Well, those are heavy. They can get tiring, especially if it's like on a Weed Eater like this. You know, you don't use that for hours upon hours unless you really want to hate yourself. So having smaller is nice. Kind of a bad part though is because of how they end up working, 2-cycles are generally louder. Majority of equipment, unless you've taken it off, it should give you the actual rating. So they're going to be generally louder. You're going to want to use some earplugs when you're using them, especially for long periods of time. Next, because they burn oil, they do kind of suffer from additional carbon issues than majority of 4-cycles like that, again, wouldn't generally have to worry about. Common places are going to be you might foul spark plugs, especially if you are mixing it too rich. You know, they can suffer from having carbon buildup in the intake port, exhaust port. Sometimes you do have to take off the muffler, clean it out. Eventually, it's just kind of like, you know, your arteries getting clogged. Like, you'll get to a point where it just gets too much and you have to clean it, unlike your arteries. A lot of them, in fact, if you own a steel, I just made a video on it, a lot of them have, they should all have actually, something called a spark arrestor screen. Those screens are there to kind of protect the surrounding area from having anything on fire get shot on it. So it's kind of a way to prevent any type of wildfire scenario, especially when, you know, late summertime, everything's dry or weed eating a big field. They put that screen there to kind of catch those pieces. Well, that screen can really plug up because you are using an oil, especially a lower quality oil. And yes, some people say some of them don't ash as well as others, and some do, and it's not really the problem, yada yada yada. All I can say is they get plugged. Go ahead, from time to time, look at your spark arrestor screen. Even if it's not completely plugged, clean it out. Just clean it. So those are a little bit of tidbits of information. There's a lot of tidbits, but those are the ones I'm going to go over. So I hope you now know how a 2-cycle works, or what it does. You know what it requires. You now know the implications of you not providing what it requires. And you know a couple useful random facts. So hopefully this is a benefit to you. I'm going to, like I said, watch my other one. I'm going to be making that actually right after this, using the same machine. So keep an eye out for it. We're going to discuss a little bit of fuel and what 2-cycle fuel is. So have a good rest of your evening. If you like what you see, put a thumbs up. Subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at SmallEngine101. And I'll catch you in the next video. Have a good night.